D&D number 5, Angels in Jesus' Name, Chapter 3. Keegan raced after Heather, his crutches clicking furiously, heading apparently for the bathroom that was situated 2 rooms down from his bedroom between the 2 rooms that belonged to the girls. He came to a halt at the door, taking in the situation with a glance. The 2 littlest were still in the bathtub, covered with bubbles, the water drained. The 2 4-year-olds were standing next to their mother, crying. The floor was underwater. Lizzie lay on her back on the floor in front of the toilet and next to the bathtub, moaning. Her eyes were closed, and the water near her head was dyed red with her blood. Dear God. Tossing the crutches aside, he dropped down beside her, shoving his casted leg out straight in the space between the toilet and the tub. He grabbed Lizzie and pulled her across his lap. She was breathing. Sighing in relief, he started issuing orders. Reaching behind him, he grabbed a girl out of the bath and handed her toward Heather. Sit her down over there in that room, he said, pointing to the open door that led to Heather's room. Heather did as ordered. He handed her the second girl, and she complied again. He then ordered the older twins to sit with their sisters. Convinced the girls were safe for a minute, he put his attention on Lizzie, examining her head. He surmised that she slipped on the wet floor and hit her head on the toilet. He reached up and grabbed a towel and held it to her head, staunching the flow of blood. Come on, talk to me, he muttered, pushing her head to the side and spreading her hair to get a look at the wound. Finding the cut itself to be relatively small, he ran his fingers over the bump. It was a good one, as bumps go. He laid her head on his thigh and opened her eyelids, checking to see if her pupils were dilated. Thankfully, she stirred. Come on back, sweetheart, he said, gently caressing her cheek. Lizzie moaned again and opened her eyes. What happened? She asked, raising her hand to her head. Keegan looked up toward Heather. I'm guessing you slipped on the wet floor and hit your head. Heather nodded. Lizzie tried to rise up, but Keegan had her held tight. He squeezed her against him and lowered his forehead to her head. Are you okay? How do you feel? I don't know. You're smothering me. He let her go. Sorry. You scared the crap out of us. All the girls' hands flew to their mouths in shock at his language. I think I'm fine, Lizzie said, pushing to her feet. You're not dizzy? Keegan asked, looking up at her. Glancing in the mirror, she tried to see the bump on her head before she shook her head. No, I think I'm fine. I don't know about that. You were out cold. She drew a deep breath. Well, I seem to be okay now. How did you know to come help? Heather came to get me. Poor little girl. She was terrified. I got in here and you were lying on the floor and the little ones were still in the tub. This could have been very bad. She nodded. Thank you for helping. She looked down at the floor between his legs. Is that my blood? Yes, it's a small cut, but you may need a stitch or 2. She frowned. I am not taking all these babies out to sit in an emergency room all night for a stitch or 2. Let me get the girls to bed, and maybe, if you don't mind, you could disinfect it and get a butterfly bandage on it. Of course I don't mind, but I don't know if you should be doing anything. Sit down and I'll get the girls to bed. Mr. Moreland. Mike. I'm fine. Really, I'm fine. She looked him over. Let me help you up. He shook his head. It'd be easier if you let me do it by myself. I just need you to get out of the way. She stepped back into the room where 4 girls were sitting side by side. They watched him scoot himself up like an inchworm until he was finally standing. Oh, dear, Lizzie complained. I'm sure there's water all down inside your cast. Keegan looked himself over and grimaced a little. This did not bode well. He sighed, hopped out of the bathroom, and scooped up his crutches. We'll look at it in the morning. Right now, let me help you get the girls settled down. They were pretty upset. Heather was such a trooper. Where is Heather? Lizzie asked. Rose pointed behind her, and Lizzie and Keegan looked into the room to find Heather curled up in the corner of her bed, her back against the headboard, her forehead leaning against her drawn-up knees. Baby, Lizzie said as she approached her, are you okay? Heather didn't answer. Turning her head away, she moved lower in the bed. Keegan sighed. It was going to be a long night. Elizabeth, why don't you go ahead and get the little ones into bed, and I'll keep Heather company until you can speak with her. Lizzie ran a hand over Heather's hair. Would that be okay, sweetie? Heather shrank from her mother's touch, and Lizzie drew her hand back as if she'd been stung. Her eyes filled with tears. Okay, honey. I'll be right back, she said, her voice choked with emotion. She turned to leave, and Keegan placed a hand on her shoulder as she passed him. It'll be okay. She's just frightened. Unconvinced, Lizzie nodded and left to dress the little ones. Heather peered up at Keegan as he came to sit on her bed. He was silent at first, waiting to see if he had her attention. Glancing around the room, he let out a heavy sigh. Whew! That was scary, he said as if he were talking to himself. I was so scared I thought for a minute there I was going to throw up. You were? A tiny voice asked. He looked down at her. Oh, sure. Seeing someone I care about get hurt? Man, that's really scary, don't you think? Heather nodded. You know what's kind of weird? What? It's like, even though I care about them, if they get hurt, it kind of makes me mad at them, too. That's really weird, huh? Heather scooted closer to him. Yeah, but why do you get mad at them? Well, it doesn't make any sense, but it's like I want to say, why did you let yourself get hurt so now that I have to worry? I mean, I know your mom didn't mean to slip on the wet floor, but darn it, she should have been more careful, you know? Well, she couldn't help it. Rose and Violet were being bad and splashed all the water out of the tub and threw out all the toys and the soap. And Mommy said enough was enough and set them out of the tub and told them to dry off. And they were running all around her, and she said she was going to spank some bare bottoms and started after them, and then her foot slipped on the soap. Oh, I see. So it really wasn't your mom's fault at all, was it? Heather shook her head. Keegan looked thoughtful. It was Rose and Violet's fault. I should be mad at them. Heather scrunched up her nose and mouth. You can't be mad at them because they're just little kids. Kids just do stuff like that sometimes. They can't help it. He said, rubbing his chin. Then who can I blame? Heather thought hard, and finally she looked up. I guess you can't blame anyone. Oh, so I guess sometimes things happen and it's no one's fault, huh? Yeah, I guess. You know what? What? I guess it's a good thing when this happened that you were so smart to come and get me. Heather nodded. If I hadn't been here, what would you have done? I would call 911, I guess. That's right. And then what? What would you do while you're waiting for the ambulance to get here? I guess I would help the girls get out of the tub so they don't drown. Good thinking. Your mom sure is lucky to have such a grown-up little girl like you to help her. Yeah, but I'm glad you're here, she said, crawling over close to him. He lifted her onto his lap. I'm glad to be here, he said softly, and was surprised to realize he truly meant it. Please don't ever leave. Oh man, now what could he say? Well, let's not worry about that right now, he finally said. I'm not going anywhere anytime soon, okay? Okay, she said, lying her head against his bare chest. Lizzie came back into the room. Heather looked up and reached for her. Lizzie flew to the bed and took her daughter in her arms. There now, baby, everything is going to be okay. Keegan stood. I'll be out here if you need me, he said, and left the room. He used the time to grab towels, to mop up the water and blood in the bathroom, and pick up the soap and toys. He rinsed the tub of soap bubbles, wiped down the counters, and made a neat pile of the wet towels. He thought about tossing the towels in the washer, but thought Lizzie would probably have others to go along with them, so he merely scooped them up, tucked them between his side and his crutch, and carried them into the kitchen and placed them on top of the washing machine lid. He slumped down at the kitchen table as his mind went over what had happened. If he hadn't been here, well, who knows? When he'd first arrived here, he was adamant that he had to leave ASAP. Now he had a strong urge to stay as long as possible. Lizzie needed him. Well, she needed someone. He sat there thinking about Lizzie, about the girls, about his assignment, about Salados and Hartman. If Keegan were to leave now and Salados tracked him here, they wouldn't believe that Lizzie didn't know his whereabouts. They'd stop at nothing to get the information out of her, and the thought of what they'd do to her sickened him. Shaking his head, he tried to clear it of the terrible images. He'd been sitting there almost a half hour and started to go check on Lizzie when she joined him, offering a weary smile. They're asleep. He nodded. Good. She placed some peroxide and cotton balls and bandages on the table. Thanks for cleaning up the mess, but you shouldn't have. He lifted his hands. Really, it was no problem. You scared me enough that I had adrenaline flowing through me pretty good. I had to release the energy somehow. You feeling okay? You took quite a hit. She nodded, touching her sore head. I have a little headache, but I'll be okay. You sure you don't mind playing nurse? He grinned. Not at all. Let me just go find the bedpan. Very funny. Lizzie pulled out a chair from the kitchen table and sat. He stood and moved close, frowning. Let me get you to sit up on the table. I'll be able to see the cut better that way, he said as he leaned the crutches against the counter. Nodding, she scooted up to sit on the table. He shuffled closer, straddling her right leg so he could get close to the right side of her head. Why hadn't he bothered to go back to his room and pull on some clothes? While he worked on her head, Lizzie stared at Mike's muscular chest, fascinated by the wiry dark hair and the washboard abs. It was so very tempting to rest her head against him, to breathe in his scent. She tried to push the thoughts from her mind. Dabbing the cut with a cotton ball soaked with peroxide, Keegan tried to keep his thoughts on making sure the cut was clean. He pushed Lizzie's head down to get a better view. You've got quite a bump. It's a pretty big goose egg, though the cut itself is pretty small. He used more cotton to dry the wound, and then took a butterfly bandage and placed it on the cut. The bandage is sticking to your hair, he said, frowning. She shrugged. That's okay. I might lose a few strands, but it will be better than having to shave off an entire patch. So, he said, pulling strands of her hair back down over the cut, I think we're done. He smiled into her eyes. She smiled back. Thank you. Sighing, he ran his hand over her cheek. You're welcome. You scared me. I'm sorry. I should have been more careful. I mean, what if you hadn't been here? He smiled. Heather and I have already had this discussion. She told me she would have called 911 and gotten the girls out of the tub. She's a smart kid. She is. She's my worrier. You're so good with her, Mike. How can I ever thank you enough for being so kind and gentle with her? How can she thank him? He knew exactly how, and he didn't feel like fighting the urge or doing the honorable thing. Like this, he muttered as he pressed his lips to hers. His hand lifted her face, his thumb pressed on her chin. She gave a soft moan, sending heat straight to his gut. Lizzie almost swooned with the incredible fire Mike was always able to create within her. The feeling of his calloused hands on her face, the scrape of his day-old beard across her skin, the taste of him, the power of his body as he leaned over her. He possessed her, consumed her. His mouth on hers was gentle, yet persistent. He would take what he wanted, and she would give. Lifting away from her slightly, he took her face in both his hands and looked into her eyes. I should stop, I know that, but I don't want to. He kissed her again. Soft moans floated up between them. The kiss deepened. She was so beautiful, so young, so innocent. Well, darn. Why did he have to go thinking along those lines? Yet it was too late. The thought of her youth and innocence brought him to his senses. Groaning, he pulled away, his chest heaving. Forgive me. When she winced, he looked into her eyes. He wanted her. He needed her. He was almost 7 years her senior, which wasn't that much, yet in experience, it was more like 20 years. She seemed so very innocent, and he suddenly felt like a fiend for taking advantage of her. He could have her. He knew that. Right here, right now. She was tired and vulnerable and lonely. How he wanted her, yet he knew it wasn't right. Besides, the way she gets pregnant so easily, that would be a fine mess, wouldn't it? Sighing, he kissed her softly and rose. Lizzie felt him mentally separate himself before he ever lifted his body away from hers. Immediately, she felt cold and alone. No, she said softly, reaching for him. Don't stop. Lord knows I don't want to, but I have to, sweetheart, or you'll end up pregnant. Besides, if I ever do make love to you, this isn't how I want it to be. Not here on your kitchen table. I want lots of time to do all the things with you I've ever imagined. She looked into his dark eyes. You've imagined being with me? Hell yes, he said gruffly. Sorry, I mean, yes, I've imagined being with you. Me too, she admitted. He smiled. Oh, Elizabeth, you're not supposed to tell me that. Why not? Because it makes it too easy for me. Sorry, you're right. I shouldn't be thinking that way. In Matthew, it says that whosoever looks on a woman to lust after her has committed adultery with her already in his heart. I think that goes for a woman looking at a man, too. He shook his head. You are destroying me. I guess I'd better get some sleep, he said, all the while thinking that probably wouldn't happen. Smiling at him, she nodded. Good night, Michael. He leaned forward and kissed her mouth lightly. Good night, Elizabeth. New scene. He'd been able to put off going back to the doctor for almost another week. However, today was the day. They dropped the girls at Mrs. Hurley's house and spent the morning at one doctor checking out the internal injuries and all afternoon at the orthopedist office checking out the leg. X-rays showed the bones were healing well. The cast had started to deteriorate due to the water damage and so was removed and replaced. Keegan reasoned with the doctor and talked her into putting him in a removable walking boot cast, even though he hadn't quite made it to the 6-week mark yet. He had to promise he would continue to use his crutches and wouldn't actually put any weight on it for at least another week. The doctor was reluctant, but she was also female, and Keegan poured on the charm, smiling and cajoling. Bemused, Lizzie couldn't take her eyes off him as his eyes twinkled up at the doctor and his dimple deepened. She wasn't a bit surprised when the doctor acquiesced. She understood fully the power he had over women and was only a little put off by the fact that he knew he had that power and today was using it shamelessly. The doctor barely looked at Lizzie when she was given instructions to call the physical therapist and make an appointment to begin therapy in 2 weeks. As they drove away from the orthopedist's office, Keegan was extremely pleased with both himself and his prognosis. He was on the mend, and certainly well enough to take care of business. And now that he would be more mobile, albeit a bit slow in a boot cast, it was time to move, he thought, his promise to the doctor completely forgotten. His mind flashed to what needed to be done. He needed to retrieve the evidence, and in order to do that, he had to have help. Help he could trust. Keegan asked Elizabeth to stop at a store and picked up a couple of prepaid cell phones. He was ready to make an important call, and since he'd immediately found the bug in the phone Nigel had provided, he used that one only to check in with his boss. She questioned why he needed the phone, since she'd seen him on his cell phone talking with Nigel, and he could certainly use her house phone if he'd like. He gave her some story about calling his publisher in a way he couldn't be traced, and she bought it. They gathered the girls from Mrs. Hurley's and stopped to pick up Happy Meals and combo meals, which he insisted on paying for since it was his idea in the first place. He said it was to celebrate the graduating from big cast to smaller removable cast. They sat in the den together, munching on cheeseburgers and fries and chicken nuggets with the girls. Afterward, he told his usual outlandish story, and then the girls were given markers to draw on his new boot as they had done previously to his cast. Lizzie finally called it a night and went to drag the little rugrats into bed. Keegan retired to his room, looking forward to the call he was about to make. The call would be to a good friend and fellow Marine who'd been special ops with Keegan. John Apple had relocated from California to Georgia with his wife a few years ago. They lived in and ran a country inn down past Macon in the small country town of Pine Forest. John, the spiritual one, as all his Marine buddies thought of him, taught martial arts at the inn and had opened several martial arts studios in the Middle Georgia area. A former student of the renowned martial arts master Eric Kino, he'd been trained by the best before he'd ever joined the Marines. Smiling, Keegan dialed the number. John answered on the first ring. "This is John," he said quietly, apprehension in his voice. Keegan knew that would be because of the unknown number. He would suspect trouble right away, and he'd be right. "John, this is Keegan." There was several seconds of silence. "I heard you were dead," John said slowly. "Yeah, well, you know what Mark Twain said." John thought. "You mean The reports of my death are greatly exaggerated? That's the one. Well, Keeg, I'm happy to know you're alive, but that's quite a mix-up, wouldn't you say? I mean, I went to your funeral. Keegan swallowed. Mom and Dad take it pretty hard? Very hard. He paused only briefly. You're in trouble, aren't you, Keeg? Big trouble. Well, you're not alone. I appreciate it. That's why I called you, beside the fact that you're here in Georgia. You're in Georgia? Tyler Springs. Where's that? An hour or so north of Atlanta in the foothills. Tell me your troubles, man, John said. Well, I don't want to go into detail on the phone, but I'll tell you the basics. You know I was working deep cover. I get made. It's okay, because I'm getting ready to blow the joint anyway. But I have to fight my way out. I killed 2 bad guys. I got the stuff, though. Everything I need to put everyone away. Drugs? I wish. That would be so much easier. Babies. They're selling freaking babies. Some of the first kids sold by these people are adults now. Some are dead. Sold for parts. Can you imagine, though? Grown-up adults. And they don't even know who they really are. Lately, though, these sickos are into a certain type of kid. And I'll leave the rest of that story until you get here. I never said I was coming. Okay. Are you coming? John chuckled. Of course. So, who made you? That's part of the problem. I don't know. Can't seem to pinpoint it. One of your own? I hate to say it, but that's what it seems. Well, that's a totally bad scene. Yeah, and I'm running a little paranoid, if you know what I mean. Well, it would be stupid to be otherwise. Okay, so listen. I know you got a wife and kid and all, so I just need you to do a few preliminaries for me. Then I need a name, someone you trust that I can trust, someone not married with kids. This really is a big one. Yeah, big enough that Keegan Tanner had to die to protect my family. Nevertheless, they're not going to buy that forever. There were agents at your funeral, and some others. I'm going to venture now and say they were the bad guys. I'd venture to say you're right. Did you really have an accident? That part is real enough. Close call, but I made it. Okay, tell me what you need. But first, here's who you need to contact. Jason Lee with the Maritech Security. Ah, yes, the FBI's competition. John chuckled. He's the best. Grandmaster Keno trained him, and then he got into the consulting business. Next thing you know, he has his own security company. Then suddenly, it's more than that. I don't have to tell you the reputation of his company. They're worldwide now. I'll contact him and tell him to expect your call. He'll send you what you need. What do you want? When do you want me to arrive? ASAP, Keegan replied. We'll talk over the plan once you're here. These people, John, they're ruthless, and they're terrorists, and they're very, very dangerous. Is CIA involved? Well, if they are, they haven't made themselves known yet. If I thought I could trust someone in the CIA, I'd bring them in. These people are big time, John. You might want to think twice about helping me. Okay. Okay, what? Okay, I thought twice, and I'm still coming. We'll get 'em, Keeg. Hang tight. I'll be in touch with what to bring. You can reach me at this number. By the way, my name is Michael Moreland. You are my cousin. Keegan pressed the button to end the call and drew a deep breath. It was the first one he'd been able to take in 5 weeks. Finally, he would be able to find the buried evidence, get it safely to a field office, and catch the snitch. But even more important, he had to stop what would be going down in about 5 weeks, or die trying. If all goes well, he intended to head right back here and spend some real time with Lizzie and her girls. If all goes well. The house was quiet except for the sound of the washer and dryer, and Keegan walked around, checking doors and windows and pulling shades, but pulled up short when he entered the den to find Lizzie asleep on the sofa, an Afghan pulled over her. He moved forward and touched her shoulder, and she didn't even flinch. Elizabeth, he said softly. She looked up, disoriented. What's wrong? What's wrong is you're tired and you need to go to bed. She shook her head. I have to change out the washer and dryer one more time and fold the last load, and then I'll go to bed. You work too hard, he said quietly. It has to be done, she said as she stretched her arms over her head, then rubbed a sore spot on her neck. Move over, he said, easing in behind her. At least let me massage your neck. He sat behind her, his boot leg stretched out along the back of the couch, and his other leg on the floor. She sat in between his thighs. The moment he placed his strong hands on her shoulders and began to rub, she began to purr. Lord, that feels so good, she murmured. Yes, it does, he said softly. She giggled. Why are you laughing? It does feel good. I'm the one getting the massage, and I'm the one getting to touch you. Oh, please. Don't you realize how alluring you are? How silky your skin is? I bet every man you pass wants to throw himself at you. Oh, yeah, right. Like some man is going to want me, old and tired, with 5 kids hanging at my knees. He sighed. Trust me, Elizabeth. Men want you. Whatever. Tell me, Mike, what are you going to do now? She gasped as he hit a particular tender knot. Now? Look, I know you're well enough to leave. Dr. Duncan said 3 months, but it's only been half that time, and you're about to be off your crutches by next week. You've healed fast. It's amazing considering what you looked like when they first brought you up to the floor. God hears and answers prayers. He is amazing. Keegan considered that for a few minutes. So, what now? Lizzie asked. Are you going home to Denver? Would you mind if I stuck around until I feel comfortable on 2 feet? The words were out before he could stop them. What was he saying? He's been saying all along that he needed to get out, but he'd realized it was already too late. If they track him here and he's already gone, would they still hurt her? And the girls? What would they do to her girls? Would the Anderson women simply disappear? These people are the epitome of evil. If they laid eyes on the gorgeous creatures that inhabit this house, would they turn and walk away from them? He doubted it. No, there was no way he could leave them now. He'd have to stick around and see this thing to the end. There was no way out. And that, he just realized, was Nigel Court's reason for placing him where he was, to ensure his cooperation to the end. Apparently, his boss had his own doubts as to the loyalty of Special Agent Tanner. Of course, I don't mind. It's just that your brother is paying me an incredible amount of money. Believe me, he can afford it. She purred as his strong hands moved over her shoulders and down her arms. She gave in to the need to lean back against him, and Keegan gave in to the need to wrap his arms around her. He held her, linking his arms around her waist. Her arms rested lightly on his. Leaning forward, he dropped a soft kiss on the top of her head. This feels good, too, just holding you. When she didn't answer, he moved his head to the side so that they were cheek to cheek. Elizabeth? She sniffled. He pulled her up into his lap and turned her sideways so he could look into her face, and a tear ran down her cheek. What's wrong, sweetie? Did I say something to upset you? She shook her head. I don't know what's wrong with me. I'm so emotional lately, really. I never cry, almost never. So why now? It's just that, well, it's been so long, you know? So long since someone held me, and so long since I felt secure and safe. That's how you make me feel when you're around. Secure and safe. It's not fair, I know, to tell you that. I'm not going to cling to you or anything. I promise. I just didn't realize how much I've missed. I mean, how much I've needed. Oh, I don't know how to explain what I'm feeling. It's okay, I get it. His arms tightened. Funny thing is, I feel the need to hold you and to be here for you and to protect you and to have you lean on me. I don't usually feel that way about women. Really? How do you usually feel about women? You know, it's like, hi, I'm into you. Are you into me? Good, let's have uh, some fun. And then, thanks, that was great, and I move on. And with me, it's different? You don't want to have some fun? No, I don't. He smiled at the frown that suddenly appeared on her sweet face. Elizabeth, you know I want you, but I want to make love to you. I want to care with you. I want to take care with you. I want to talk to you and get to know you and hold you just like I'm doing now. She sighed as he cuddled her in his arms, brushing a stray hair from her face and placing a chaste kiss on her forehead. Mike? I want you to tell me a story like you do my girls. A story, huh? He wasn't so panicked this time as he was when little Rose had first asked him. Over the past few weeks, he'd gotten pretty darn good at it, especially when he stuck to his angel theme. Okay, he said, turning her a bit more on his lap so he could see her whole face. Once upon a time, there was a little angel. She smiled. She had hair so blonde and soft it seemed like a cloud drifted around her head instead of real hair. Her eyes were as blue as the bluest sky. Her lips were soft and pink, like the petals of a rose, and her face was shaped like a heart. This little angel was so sweet and good. She worked hard to please others and to make them happy. And as she grew into a woman angel, she continued doing all her good works, for that's what angels do. He paused and drew a deep breath. She seemed so lost, like she'd lost what it meant to be not just a mother, but a woman, and he wanted to change that. After a few seconds, Lizzie's eyes left his mouth where they'd settled and glanced up into his eyes. Why did you stop? He'd stopped as he mulled over the idea that had come to him of just where to take the story. He smiled at her. I was just getting my story straight in my head. Anyway, one day, the angel came upon a horrible, ugly toad. The toad was hurt, and the angel couldn't stand to see any creature in pain, so she gently lifted the toad and kissed him. Now, usually a toad changes into a handsome prince, but that's when he's kissed by a princess. This toad was kissed by an angel, and suddenly he became a man. Just a plain, ordinary man. Still, he was no longer in pain, and for that he was extremely grateful. The man watched the angel and saw how she did good things for everyone around her. Sometimes she did so much and she got so tired that she could barely hold her head up. And the man decided he wanted to do something for the angel, because that's how it works. When an angel does something good for someone, then that someone wants to do something good too. That's how angels change the world. Elizabeth sighed. You're very good at this. He chuckled. I like that sound. What sound? You laughing. Okay, well, cool. He didn't know what to say about that. He went on quickly, telling the rest of the story about how the angel changed the man's life and they fell in love, and she asked God to make her a real woman so that she could be with the man. He knew it was a naughty story. When he finished, Lizzie smiled. That was interesting. That was about you, he confessed. She looked up quickly, then gave a soft laugh. I'm afraid I'm nothing like the woman you just described. He leaned down to her. You are the most beautiful, sexy woman I've ever known, he said softly. Not giving her time to respond, he gathered her close against his chest, his arms coming around her, holding her there. He pulled the Afghan up around her shoulders and rocked her, and in seconds she was sound asleep. And that is the end of chapter 3.